losing battle. When he would necropsy his animals, those animals that were dying, he would check the liver for manganese specifically, because manganese is very critical for all of our defense reactions and detoxification of the mycotoxins and those things. They were all very severely deficient in manganese, and he wanted to know why. Well, in Roundup Ready soybeans, for instance, there are scientific peer-reviewed papers showing that you have as much as a 48–50% reduction in manganese in that soybean seed, soybean feed. We see the same thing in corn, a reduction. And other micronutrients are reduced. Well, if you're feeding the same carbohydrate and that, you're assuming that everything else has kind of come along the same, but the mineral content quite often is very significantly reduced, not just for manganese, but for other essential nutrients, that then has a very dramatic effect in the food quality as well as the feed quality for those animals that are being fed. And as this one veterinarian and many other veterinarians have found, that it's not just an isolated situation, it's a much more general situation than was anticipated prior to that. When you have a manganese deficiency in an animal, it can cause premature or stillbirth or abortion. The animals, those stillborn calves, generally with manganese deficiency, will have kind of an arthritic appearance, because manganese is required for calcium deposition. Same thing in man.
So what are the overall effects that this is having on plants and on livestock, on animals?
I have a letter or an email that I received from a veterinarian in another state. And he said, I've been working 3 years trying to find out why my hog producer that I'm supporting, servicing here, why we can't make any headway to keep him in business. He said, I've sent tissue into various laboratories. We've checked for PRRS, they've checked for Clostridium toxins, they've checked for viruses, all of the known causes, and he said they're always negative. And when they've gotten that, I've been able to refer him to the veterinarians that can identify the organism. Those veterinarians then, in a new situation where they haven't already gone through that very costly and long process of trying to find out what's happening, they've gone in and they've actually done split samples, and they'll send them in to check for all of the known causes. They come back negative, but it always comes back with this organism. Because of what we were seeing in both the plant epidemics of Gauss's wilt and sudden death syndrome that were associated with the increase in infertility and abortions in cattle, pigs, chickens, and horses, that there was a direct concern with the continued use or abuse of the system without recognition of what those ties really meant, because the problem is continuing to get much more intense, much more damaging for both our animal as well as our crop production systems.
What are some, I guess, crop diseases that corn and soybean farmers have experienced?
The last 2 years we've had a very significant epidemic of Gauss's wilt on corn and sudden death syndrome on soybeans. We've had to increase the rate of glyphosate, so we've just continually hammered against those organisms that would give us some natural biological control of that disease. The mode of action of glyphosate as an herbicide is to suppress resistance and increase disease, so that when you have any weed that's killed by glyphosate, you've increased its susceptibility to disease. Plant pathologists are also seeing that increased disease and the inability to keep their crop production, their growers, efficient and in business. And then you look at the quality of that crop that's been produced which we're growing initially for food and feed, even if it's going into alcohol, the rest of that crop's used for feed. And we find very high populations of this organism in the distiller's grain. So it's coming through the ethanol production, the fermentive process. Find it very high in corn silage. So that the insuling process seems to give it in an environment where it's even able to continue to grow even beyond what it did in the regular growth of the plant.
So knowing what you know about glyphosate and its impact on other crops, I'm curious, you're now more concerned about how Roundup Ready alfalfa will impact dairy herds, cattle, and hogs in the U.S.?
If this organism is associated with alfalfa after glyphosate application, like it is with the corn and the soybeans, that one I would express a very serious concern. When you take our number one forage crop and you place it in any kind of jeopardy, we have a tremendous impact on the sustainability of our animal production. Because with alfalfa as a perennial crop, open pollinated with an insect vector, the bee is the vector for the pollen, that in 5 years you won't have anything except Roundup Ready alfalfa. There's no way that you can have any coexistence unless it defies all of the epidemiological data that we've accumulated for 100 years on plant diseases. There's no way to maintain a non-Roundup Ready population of alfalfa.
Knowing what you know and knowing the science so far, what you understand, what advice would you give to President Obama and Secretary Vilsack in terms of moving forward with the recent approvals of Roundup Ready alfalfa and sugar beets? Would you advise them to hold off?
Well, I put it in my letter, a request that they would delay any decision until we had the answers that I feel are very critical, and establish a need. Why add another, or why continue to abuse a system that we can already see is badly abused? But certainly to delay any decision on planting until the relationship, both from a nutrition, which is rarely analyzed, and there's no question that the Roundup Ready isn't substantially the same as the non-Roundup Ready. It's limited data, but all the data that's there says it isn't. And certainly with this new organism, it puts it in a different category all by itself. I'd really hope that there would have been a delay and that there would have been the resources allocated then to answer the questions that we've talked about. And to get a delay until we could get those answers to verify that we're not going to further increase the severity of this organism as it impacts in the animal industry, but then also to get that relationship for alfalfa production, because we have a couple of new alfalfa diseases that we're struggling with. What happens then on your number one forage crop, if we see the same predisposition either to this new organism that makes it a hazard to animal production, can we afford to just open the floodgates wide open before we have the answers? What's the urgency?